Look out, Mount Midoriyama. The Americans have arrived.
It all comes down to this. 4 stages of the most treacherous obstacle course ever built. Only one can win the $250,000 grand prize.
This is Japan's Mount Midoriyama. More than 1,500 feet of metal, mud, and pain. Over the past 14 years, only 3 have ever succeeded.
From 6 regions across the United States.
I will be the first.
I will be the first.
I will be the first.
The first. American Ninja Warrior.
In 7 seasons, an American has summited Mount Midoriyama. Tonight, 90 men and women vying for $1 million and the chance to become a legend.
That's what legends are born.
Oh my goodness! Does he have it?
Past stage 2, you had a good year. Past stage 3, you had a great year. Vegas stage 2. Vegas stage 3. That's where legends are made.
I'm not gonna let this moment slip through my fingers again. It's my time.
Mr. Gill here is going to be a star.
I've been waiting for this moment for 5 years.
The Kingdom Ninja reigns supreme on stage 2. The crowd on the edge of their seats. It's on 2. What's it going to do? One and done. One and done. Set the dismount. It's a showdown on stage 4. Oh boy.
September 16th, 2019. On this day, the finale of Season 11 aired on NBC. During this episode, we saw 21 athletes, more than ever before, attempt Stage 3 for the chance of claiming total victory, becoming the next American Ninja Warrior, and claiming the $1 million cash prize. Out of the 21 athletes, 2 of them, 8-time Ninja veteran, real-life ninja Drew Dressel, and 5-time Ninja veteran, Kingdom Ninja Daniel Gill, cleared Stage 3, both for the first time in their careers. Both of them made an attempt at the Stage 4 tower, with Drew completing it with the infamous 2.5 seconds left on the clock, which had been left on the clock by both Yusuke Morimoto and Makoto Nagano before him. Daniel came just short of the tower, but regardless, the 2 celebrated with our new American Ninja Warrior, the real-life ninja Drew Dressel. This day marked the final instance of many things, not just the finale of Season 11, but also the finale of ANW as we knew it. More specifically, in how it was edited, how it presented itself, the values of it as a show, and the athletes that would make it big. After this season, there was a whole new breed that came up, mostly to the show's own volition, but so many things would begin to change that the skull of it almost felt completely different. Finally, September 16th, 2019, with the whole world watching as the 3rd American Ninja Warrior was crowned the 2nd Grand Champion, it was also the day ANW stopped being a sports show. Hey, what's up everyone? It is time. This is the biggest project I have presented to you guys since the 6 who have claimed Condensea back in November of last year. Today, we are once more going to be talking about the evolution of American Ninja Warrior, but in a different context than we ever have before. Talking about its editing, its presentation of competitors and its competition, and every little thing about the individual production of the show when it comes down to post and editing. This is a story about change, and how it could slowly but surely turn on a show that is still itself at its goal, but on the outside, it really is completely different. This is not to criticize the later seasons of ANW in any real way. In fact, if you like those seasons, that's totally fine. I'm just explaining how different they really are, and explaining how ANW just isn't the same show anymore. because I feel like a lot of people haven't really realized this, at least not in the way that I have. So I wanted to put it all in one place. This is all my opinion, but this is genuinely me dissecting the show for where it is in the present day, right before ANW 18. To get started, let me define what I call a sports show. Well, I don't watch actual sports, so I may not be the best person to ask this question outside of a Ninja Warrior context. But for the context of this video, I define a sports show as a show that puts its competition over the stories it tells. They can tell the stories of the people in the competition. It's important so that way you can root for them. But when it comes down to the show itself, it cares more about the progression of the competition and the stories that competition ends up impacting over the stories of the people who end up walking on that stage. Important to note that ANW was once this way, but is not anymore. For the first 10 years of the show's life, aka seasons 1 to 11, from 2009 to 2019, this is how I would describe American Ninja Warrior. Despite some drops in the road, such as ANW 6, where NBC really tried to over-progressivize the show, it was always a competition first and foremost. It was always about the quest to see who was going to be the first, and later on, the next American Ninja Warrior. However, as of ANW 12 to the present day, it is not about that. ANW is now about seeing these people do wildly inhuman things to see who can claim the $250,000 grand prize at the end of the road. Only the fastest ninja can do it. Everyone else will be left in the dust like they didn't even compete at all. I'm going to talk about the early era of the show I just established, ANW 1 to 11 first. Then we'll talk about ANW 12 through 17, and talk about how these ideals have changed over the years. From ANW 1 to 11, ANW was many different things, but to streamline this, I came up with 5 things that I believe make ANW back then a sports show. It's the emphasis of speed in the competition, the ability for a season to stand without a gimmick, the number of cutoffs in the leaderboard, aka how important it was for someone to be cut off of the leaderboard by one spot, the ability for obstacles and athletes to be as simple as that, not needing to be flashy or have some kind of specific flair to them, and finally, the accomplishment of total victory, or becoming an American Ninja Warrior, or being important and acknowledged for what it is. Starting off with the speed factor, in early ANW, speed was fairly important. In fact, even in this early era, you can argue speed became less important over the years, but it still stayed fairly relevant. From ANW 1 through 3, as ANW was a qualifier for Sasuke, with much easier courses, it was about who had the top 30 fastest times to move on to the semifinals. And it was unlike nowadays, where you could just complete the course and you're guaranteed to move on. It wasn't like that back then. You just had to have one of the top 30 fastest times. ANW 1 had about 50 clears on its course, with only the top 30 moving on, and everyone clearing within a minute. This standard stayed for ANW 2 and 3, and even ANW 4 to a certain degree, although it wasn't as steep in that season due to the ways in competitive field and the fact that we were going to Vegas and not Sasuke. ANW 5 did change this with the addition of the earlier rule I just mentioned, allowing everyone who had cleared the course to move on in both qualifiers and semis. However, the fastest time was still important. The fastest time was often shown as the final one of the night, especially in ANW 4 and 5, where the qualifiers, each city qualifier was chopped up into 2 episodes. Usually at the end of either the first or second episode, the fastest runner would end up being shown as the final runner of the night, while at the end of the first episode, they usually showed off a great legend. Sometimes they reverse these, like in the case of ANW 4's first qualifier, showcasing its fastest time at the end of Part 1 and showcasing the known legend at the time, Levi Muhlenberg, as the final runner, despite him going out on the very first obstacle. However, even with the rule change in ANW 5, this mentality was still used, and when ANW 6 completely changed the format in terms of the runtime of the show, allowing the qualifiers to be shown in one episode instead of the usual 2, things became a lot more streamlined. But even in ANW 6, they often did show the fastest one last. Let's just go into some examples. The fastest time in the Dallas qualifiers was Dylan Gates. A new rookie who had the mentor Brent Stephenson, who had just fallen on the 5th obstacle. In his running order, he actually eliminated Brent Stephenson from the top 30, as Brent had made it to and had failed to the wing toss just earlier. the way the show presented this, it was like the apprentice knocking out their mentor, which was a pretty fascinating story at the time. Then there's also the rivalry between Joe Morosky and Elwood Hall presented throughout the season. These two ended up being the top two of the entire season. So they really built up their rivalry, with the two competing for the fastest time of each round. Until ANW 10, this was about the mentality. The fastest time was often shown last, with some exceptions here and there, but usually it was shown at the end of the night. The only exception that I can really think of off the top of my head is the ANW 8 Oklahoma City qualifiers, where Thomas Stillings was shown in a mid-run before Daniel Gill. But it was mostly done in that way because this was actually how they ran in the night, and it gave Thomas Stillings the opportunity to gloat about beating Gill for the fastest time over ANW 7, where Gill ended up beating him for the fastest time, which was built up as a big rivalry, like a spiritual successor to the Joe and Elwood Hall dynamic, or the previous True Dresser and Foot Rodriguez debate from AW's 4 and 5 that I hadn't even mentioned at this point. But don't get me wrong, they were huge aspects of the speed in ANW in the early days as well. In ANW 10, the fastest time became a little less important, with it often not being the final one of the night, instead the Mega Wall taking priority most of the time. For ANW 11, speed was made very important with the addition of the Power Tower. The top two of the night were the battling in the Power Tower for the Speed Pass. It passed, allowing you to skip straight to Las Vegas without the need to worry about the semifinals. In those semifinals, however, the fastest two times could also compete for a safety pass, allowing a retry in Las Vegas. It's one extra shot that could be the difference maker between going into stage 2 or 3 or going into water and ending your season surprisingly early. This ended up saving the seasons of both True Dresser and Foot Rodriguez, who both ended up having their best seasons ever, not to mention True Dresser winning the entire show. Though this ends up being significant for a way different reason, if True Dresser did not get a safety pass in Atlanta, and it went to Kevin Carbone instead, it would not have been used. Dresser would have fallen on Tire 1, and Kevin Carbone would have still went to Stage 3 without using it. Daniel Gill would have won the season as the last ninja standing, because Drew never made it that far. Next up, the ability for a season to stand without a gimmick. Now, let's quickly define a gimmick in this context. A gimmick, at least to me, is a small change that heavily alters the competition. Something that seems small at first, but changes the entire structure. The first gimmick of ANW, at least to me, was the idea of going to Japan. This was the beginning stick that made it a huge motivation. Then, a big gimmick for ANW 2 was the upping of the competition, with the addition of both boot camp and the actual prize money in general, as ANW 1 did not have prize money aside from the stuff you'd win for winning Sasuke, which wasn't exactly American money, obviously. Then ANW 4 stepped it up tremendously with the addition of Las Vegas instead of Japan. Now 100 people went to Mount Midoriyama instead of just 10. Yeah, now things mattered a lot more. Finally, the prize money was upped once more from $500,000 and to $1 million as of ANW 7. And after ANW 8, they announced the Obstacle Design Challenge. The coin signed with the digital series Crashing the Course, ANW challenged the people at home to design obstacles of their own and submit them to the show, with them being prominently featured throughout the upcoming seasons. All of these would technically be considered gimmicks, new ways to get people interested in the show. However, they were a lot more tame than the stuff we would get later. The number of cutoffs and the leaderboard. This isn't a long point, but usually whoever was in 31st place or 16th place, especially if they were a known veteran, did matter. Heck, in the early days, they would end up showing off random people who barely missed the cutoff. Some early examples include Kane Sinclair, despite getting his one fast forwarded, actually being brought up as something serious when Brent Stephenson almost failed the warp wall in the first semifinal, of ANW 4. Then there was stuff like them building up Grant McCartney getting eliminated during the LA finals of ANW 10, where they had a fast forward segment with Brian Crutch, David Campbell, and Nicholas Coolidge all beating his time to Patriot Pass, leading to Sean Bryan knocking him out as the final one of the night. And it famously being one of the few times in a recent season someone made it all the way to the 9th obstacle but still didn't move on. There was also a big deal about our little-known competitor Dougie Fresh not moving on to not moving on to the finals of ANW 12. This is what I would call the final time this was ever important in ANW, as after this, the cutoff point was often never acknowledged, and whoever was in that final spot was often cut, or most of the time at least fast-forwarded. It never really mattered, even if it was as someone you would consider a veteran. The competitors back then are a very similar story. They were just that. The names who had gone the farthest. Names who had gone the farthest, but they never really had specific ninja names. They were always just a person's first and last name. David Campbell, Paul Casimir, Brent Stephenson, James McGrath, Brian Orozco, and Levi Muhlenberg. All athletes who made it big, who, while yes, they may have gained ninja names in their later years, at the time of AEW's early years, they did not have those names. They were simply remarked for their amazing performances in the finals. However, nowadays, your story is almost everything. I've personally heard stories of many athletes who deserve to be on the show and have the stats to prove it, but not the story to get the producers to want to get them on the show. And that's just because the standards have changed. The people who do get on the show as well, it definitely varies how much of an impact you're going to make, even if you go far. Key evidence of this is Noah Munya, who, while yes had a good showtime throughout Season 15, his rookie season, went on to do the exact same thing in Season 16, placing in the top 3, coming just short of a Kanzen, but getting literally no showtime for it. This is the difference right here. But back then, and if you did as well as Noah Munya did, absolutely you would have gotten the showtime. Even considering that getting to Stage 4 twice in your first 2 seasons was unheard of at the time, this is still a little disrespectful to Noah's amazing first 2 seasons on the show. Oh, even in the current landscape that he's competing in, he still should have gotten that showtime. Obstacle and athlete simplicity. The simple fact here is that every obstacle and every athlete didn't need some kind of story or some kind of flair to them. Back in the early days of ANW, an obstacle could just be that, an obstacle. We didn't need the getaway or carnival to flip everything on its head with a million pieces parts and a million obstacles combined into one. And all this dumb theming. We didn't need the double dipper to be changed down to something a lot more stupid in the form of the roller coaster, even if I do like the idea of making it more of a triple dipper. Honestly, that's what the roller coaster should have been called, if I'm being honest. But back then, we could have obstacles that were just very simple, cause a lot of damage. Stuff like Roulette Row, the Wedge, Cannonball Alley, and much, much more. These obstacles were so basic. In fact, you could even argue the simple warp swing from ANW 1 was like this, as a lot of people failed that despite how simple of an obstacle it is, just because of how bad the competitive field was at that point. Same with the Salmon Ladder on ANW 2. See, it was just as simple as that. Simple obstacles, maybe not even taken from Sasuke, it could be seen as big ninja killers. But now we need to have the Gambler in Stage 1 for some reason for the 5th obstacle to have a big knockout weight, or whatever the heck Tetherball was trying to be. Finally, the accomplishment of total victory meaning something. I've already mentioned Drew Drescher as an American Ninja Warrior, but there's also the first 2 American Ninja Warriors, Isaac Calgero and Jeff Britton. Isaac won the prize money, and was given a lot of the fame for becoming the first American Ninja Warrior Grand Champion. However, Jeff Britton got basically the same accomplishment, in fact, maybe even better, as he hit an extra buzzer over Isaac. In addition, Jeff Britton also has the title of the first American Ninja Warrior, aka the first person to clear all 4 stages. However, because he didn't receive the money, this was a big point of controversy at the time. The show still made it a known fact that Jeff Britton was still an American Ninja Warrior. Heck, way back then, Matt Eisman went on a podcast and ended up stating this very thing.
It's just that because the money wasn't at stake and it wasn't really 2 people coming down to it, I don't think it was as obvious that was the case. So while I get what people were saying, in reality, both of them are American Ninja Warriors. We made a point of that. So I hope that was clear in the show. I think a lot of people didn't catch that message, and that we said both of them have earned the title of American Ninja Warrior. Isaac got the money.
So yeah, back then it was important that despite the fact that Jeff Britton didn't win the prize money, that he was still given the title of American Ninja Warrior. Heck, Jeff Britton even said it himself.
I hit every single buzzer for a perfect season. I may not have won $1 million, but I did take away something pretty special.
He did it! Jeff Britton is the first American Ninja Warrior!
So yeah, it's okay that Jeff didn't win the money. He still got the title, and while yes, the money would have been nice, it's all that's needed technically. And even looking at internationally, this is still the standard. There was literally only one instance in the entire international history of Ninja Warrior where more than one person got total victory in the same season, but both got money. This being 2021's Ninja Warrior Germany Season 6, where Moritz Hans and Rene Casse both made it to the final stage, with Moritz having the slower time of the two, but still getting paid 25,000 euros over the grand prize of 300,000 euros, which was paid to the actual winner, Rene Casse. Like I said, this is literally the only instance, to my knowledge, that a Ninja Warrior that two total victories happened in the same season, and neither competitor got screwed over in terms of not winning the prize money. So that's what ANW looked like as of 2009 to 2019. In terms of the 5 factors, that I would call it a speed show. So what changed? Well, let's talk about ANW 12. Even before the pandemic, ANW 12 was going to be a different season. As I've talked about in the past, ANW 12 was going to have a few changes to it. First off, it was going to have less qualifiers, with only 3. This is less than any other season aside from ANW 1 to 3. It would have 1 in LA, 1 in St. Louis, and 1 in Washington, D.C., presumably working the same way as ANW 11's qualifiers did. Most likely some adjustments given the fact that this is only half as many as ANW 11. Maybe 2 rounds are going to be filmed in each place to make a round 6, or maybe less people would have moved on with the return of the wildcard system, or something along those lines, so that way we still had around 100 people competing in Vegas. Heck, in ANW 5, they actually caveated this with having when they had only 4 cities to work with, as they ended up adding 20 wildcards to round out. Now, yeah, this wasn't really the best for the time, but this is how they solved that problem. So I would predict something similar would have happened if Season 12 happened the way it was supposed to. The second notable thing, and what I would probably call Season 12's original gimmick, was the introduction of teenagers to the sport. It's the actual age limit was stay at 19, a select few 15 and up year olds who had previously competed in ANW Junior were actually invited to compete on this season. Some notable examples including Vance Walker and Elijah Browning, slowly but surely integrating them into the show's format as special invites that deserve to be competing on the show alongside the big-time vets. More on this later. However, literally 48 hours before the first qualifier was going to happen, the ATS team announced an indefinite delay on all the qualifiers. Now, initially speaking, they just canceled the LA one and said they were going to have it filmed later, with the next 2 still going on. But then they got indefinitely canceled, and the season got thrown on its head thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, as of June, NBC came up with a new plan. They set up a qualifier in the St. Louis Dome they had originally rented out for that qualifier. They invited a small group of competitors to captain teams to go compete in a watered-down version with 4 qualifiers, 2 semifinals, 1 finals round, and then a top 8 Power Tower playoffs. Totally different season with a totally different idea in mind. A scaled-down competition, but with the caveat of not having competitors wear masks on the course, and having social distancing promoted throughout the actual course design, with them only allowing the 2 teammates to watch the individual runs along with Zoom calls. This coincides with the main gimmick of AEW 12, aka progressiveness, and bringing hope into the world. This could have been done pretty well with this season. I do think Ninja as a sport can be seen as something to bring hope into the world by proxy, but NBC cared way too much about this and made it the entire point of AEW 12. AEW 12 was the first season it was more about being progressive than being a competition, and this would never ever change. Both the team aspect and and the not mentioned yet Black Ninjas for Black Lives movement are both examples of this. To sum up the whole team situation, production picked the teammates, and they were usually just really random picks, that ended up having one common thing in mind with the athlete. Like pairing two young guns with Joe Mawaski, even if neither of them had ever met him. Or having Sean Bryant having two random Christians on his team because he's religious. There's plenty more examples. People who just really should not have been on this season, but were just put there because production decided on such. This was actually so egregious that an entire team was cut from the broadcast. This being from the furthest rookie of ANW 11, Seth Rogers, where he had brought with him both Isaiah Wakeham and Ashley Wells. All three of them did not move on to the semifinals in the first qualifier, but as a result, none of them were shown, which ends up being weird when you realize that this is Seth Rogers' final season as of recording, and Isaiah Wakeham's first season, who would become a notable veteran starting at ANW 13. This was his first season, but not many people really know that. And Ashley Wells, I couldn't even tell you how well she did. I can't find where she fell. This is not even mentioning John Alexis Jr., who was cut twice from the broadcast despite his teammates being shown, with him being the person from that team to actually go all the way to the finals. Both his ones in the qualifiers and semis were cut, with him being the only person fast-forwarded in the finals. Then there's the Ninjas for Black Lives movement. I'm gonna keep this brief for the sake of not talking about things that just simply aren't in my place, but some real-world events made racism more relevant in the world, so NBC wanted to capitalize on this, so they made a really slapped-together publicity stunt. The Ninjas of Black Lives movement was basically that. They forced JJ Woods and Najee Richardson to have segments about it, no matter how genuine they really were, and then forced many athletes to wear the shirts and banners. Though some did wear them legitimately, most likely in support of the movement. The movement itself was shoved into the broadcast and was completely ignored after the qualifiers ended, with Najee Richardson really being the only person to promote it afterwards, with it never being brought up again after the season, despite us being seen as a surprisingly big and brand-scale movement. Regardless, both movements made this season way more progressive than any other AEW season before it. But in addition, both of them were completely forgotten about by the time the qualifiers ended. Yeah, no one cared. The competition became the first acknowledgement from here on out, so clearly NBC was just doing what NBC does and making ANW progressive. But as a result, ANW 12 felt like a progressive over competition season for half of it. And I'd argue the season isn't really all that good, aside from the Women's Championship, which you could argue isn't even a part of the season, because despite being filmed with it, it was not broadcast with it. If you really want to see AEW 12 as an exception, let's talk about the preceding seasons and how the 5 factors we mentioned earlier were handled in those seasons. We'll include AEW 12 in this discussion, but AEW 13 through 17 will be much more heavily discussed in this case. For the first couple years of this new era, speed was handled in a fairly similar way. It was sometimes the last one of the night, and there was of course the Power Tower in AEW 12, in addition to the Safety Pass in AEW 13, so it kind of mandated them to show most fast times. In addition to teenagers causing a lot of ruckus in the competition, more on that later, made them actually be responsible for half of the fastest times. So they kind of just showed them by proxy. So while yes, they seemed to operate under the same complex once for season 13, it seemed to be mostly a coincidence with the contrast of the new gimmick, as with one of the new gimmicks of the season, that being the teenagers, which, like I just said, we'll get to later. However, AEW 14, 15, 16, and 17 kind of throw this on its head. First off, AEW 14 is the first season. It housed the 3rd, 4th, and 5th times in AEW's history that they fast-forwarded the fastest time in a course. Literally before this, the only 2 times the fastest time was fast-forwarded was Casey Finley in AEW 5 Stage 2 and Anthony DeFranco during the Cleveland qualifiers of AEW 9. But starting at AEW 14, the fastest time began to be fast-forwarded occasionally. Specifically, 3 separate times. Matt Bradley's fastest time during the second qualifier, Ethan Swanson's fastest time during Stage 1, when this being the first time Stage 1's fastest time was ever fast-forwarded, and then Matt Domingo's fastest time on Stage 2. This being notably a new speed record for Stage 2 as well, in addition to Matt Domingo's further performance in ANW 14 in Stage 3. It seems really egregious in retrospect. An extra fact about ANW 14 Stage 1 that I'd like to note here too is the fact that the entirety of the top 6 fastest times on Stage 1 were fast-forwarded throughout the 2 nights on Stage 1. Yep, the fastest time that was fully shown was Josh Levin's 7th place time. Everyone who placed above was either fast-forwarded or was shown via the lightning round fast-forwards at the end of Stage 1, which showcased 5 Stage 1 finishers that the production did not have the time or care to give full-on fast-forwards. This is absolute disrespect to the top times of that season. And plenty of these ones that definitely should have been shown and should have been given their time of day. ANW 15 went up the ante with this, with them fast-forwarding the first qualifier's fastest time in addition to 3 out of the 4 semi-final matchups. Building on the point about semi-finals, this season had safety pass races at the end of the night, but fast-forwarded literally all but 3 people ended up being in these matchups. And 2 of them were in the same were the top 2 from one of the episodes. So, most of the time, the people who were competing at the end of the night, you weren't really told to care about them because they were fast-forwarded. I don't care that the races were blowouts. These people are important because they were racing for a coveted thing at the end of the episode. In addition to Safety Pass meaningless this season due to it not being allowed to be used on Stage 2 anymore. The final thing for ANW 15 is that the fastest times weren't even shown or revealed in Stage 2. H2. The timer was never shown during these ones, and because of that, we don't actually know who had the fastest time on Stage 2 in ANW 15. A lot of people just assumed it was NASA Gilmore with his fast 1. But with my own timing, we found that it may have been Noah Munier, as he actually timed about a second faster than NASA Gilmore. However, this isn't accounting for any cuts made in the editing for Westing or anything like that, which is why there was an asterisk in my fastest time montage. ANW 16 seemed to mostly rectify this, but had basically the same idea in mind. The fastest time was fast-forwarded 4 times once again in ANW 16, but this time it was a little less egregious. It was fast-forwarded in the first, 6th, and 8th qualifiers, as well as on Stage 1. I would personally call the fastest time on Stage 1, gotten by Noah Munier, to really be the only actually bullcrap fast-forward of a fastest time from this season. This one really should have been shown, especially if you're going to show Caden Lebsek, who literally missed his time by barely half a second. Yeah, both these ones should have been shown, not just one of them. However, aside from this though, Season 16, like I said, seemed to mostly fix the problem from ANW 15. As it actually showed most people who were in the safety pass matchups, with the exception of a couple people who placed second. In addition, they actually showed the timer in Stage 2. They never acknowledged that Kai Beckstrand had the fastest time out of anyone, but they did show them. And plus it was important as you had to clear the course in a fast time in order to make the one-offs in terms of the people who did not win their races. So, yeah, they had their reasons, and I'm glad they ended up rectifying this. Finally, in ANW 17, the problem seems to be mostly fixed, but still present in a different way now. In ANW 17, the fastest time was only probably fast-forwarded twice. Noah Muniz during the 6th qualifier, and Kai Beckstrands during the first course of the racing finals. First off, let's talk about the racing finals and fastest times there. It straight up didn't matter. Although it was shown throughout the night, and Kai Beckstrand did get the fastest time over Isaiah Thomas by about 1/10 of a second. When I looked for these fastest times for my montage, I had to go hunting for them. Hans Hurst's fastest time on the 2nd course was literally the final one on that course and the only person to get under a minute. The 3rd and final course before the extended course was introduced had a fastest time too, claimed by Kai Beckstrand as well. But it was never acknowledged, and I even decided to omit it from my video. Although if I ever updated a video, I think I would put it in there anyway, because it does count in a way. but it didn't matter who got the fastest time here. Matt Eisman even said as such.
Just to be clear, at this point, there's no advantage to being the fastest, other than maybe intimidating future opponents.
Yeah, it's true, but still, we should acknowledge who was super fast on this course, even if they won their race in a landslide. The fastest time in the extended course was never revealed either, with it most likely coming from Kai Beckstrand in the finale with a time of about 1 minute 17 seconds. But again, this is another time that was never shown by the show, and is a guess on my part via my own timing. That was a long tangent, but that is how speed's been handled. Not well, to put it bluntly. For the second factor, literally every season, with the exception of ANW 14 to a certain degree, has had a gimmick of some kind. In fact, this even extends back to the previous era, starting in ANW 10. ANW 10 had 3 of them. The Mega Wall, the Last Ninja Standing Wall, and allowing 19-year-olds to compete. AW 11 just added the Power Tower, and the result is speed and safety passes. AW 12, it was all the progressiveness we already talked about. AW 13, it was allowing teenagers to compete in addition to split decision. AW 14 didn't have a gimmick of its own, but it did carry over the teenagers and split decision from the previous season. Season 15, though honestly everything about the season feels like a gimmick, the main one is the racing. It altered the entirety of the season and basically affected every single round with the exception of stage 4. But even then, everyone was racing for the fastest time to get the million. And no one really cared the fact that Daniel Gill got total victory. More on this a little later. AW 16 didn't have any new gimmicks of its own, but similar to AW 14, it still worked with the gimmicks of AW 15, it being filmed in the same year, lacking any new obstacles, and having the same format. As a result, the format just felt more normal, and the season felt better because it didn't have the sting on it, but it was still there regardless. Since it was filmed in the same production year, I do choose to still call it a gimmick of 16, despite it technically originated in 15. All these gimmicks were originated for the same purpose in both cases, so I would rather call the racing a gimmick of both 15 and 16, given that statement. Finally, ANW 17 has the entire format change of removing Mount Midoriyama and totally flipping the entire show on its head. Even ANW 18 is confirmed to have a gimmick. The 3-way racing. Yeah, however this is incorporated into the competition, which is mostly unknown at this point, this is still considered a gimmick because it heavily alters the competition for a very stupid reason. And in all these cases, every single change was mostly made to bring in more viewers and to flip the competition. Leaderboard cutoffs are kind of a fascination in recent history, more specifically in seasons 13 and 14. The COVID-19 pandemic has played a big role in terms of alternates getting into the Vegas finals despite not qualifying, as a majority of athletes who got to be in ones who placed 16th in the semifinals still got to go to Vegas from these 2 seasons. In fact, there are only 2 exceptions. 6 of the 8 people who placed 16th place still got to go to Vegas due to people catching COVID. This ultimately makes the people who placed 16th place not matter. Additionally, even if these people did not get to Vegas like they originally planned to, these athletes got no spotlight, as at best they would get a fast forward, but more likely their ones would get cut. This is even more fascinating for people like Juna Munez, who has his one in the finals completely cut despite making it to Vegas as an alternate. As he's one of only 2 Vegas Ultimates to have their one shown during the edit, with the rest getting cut. The only other athlete to have been shown in their Vegas one as an alternate being Jody Avila, who got into the Vegas finals of season 13 thanks to Daniel Gill catching COVID. This is also pretty big for 2 big names who would have never gotten their breakouts if it weren't for this. Both Jackson Erdos and James Sanella both made it to stage 2 in season 14, but they only got to even half those seasons because both Joe Mulaski and Najee Richardson caught COVID before Vegas, allowing them to take the spots as alternates. While yes, you can argue this is a very different situation than the leaderboard cutoffs from the previous era, it still acknowledges just the different landscape that they are in, and how much they have changed since the sport's inception. Every obstacle and athlete absolutely has to be flashy. Competitors are often one of 2 things if they aren't a teenager nowadays. Either A, they have a tragic story, tragic story that they bring up once for the sake of sharing a story, and then forget about them afterwards, or they have something else to their personality, such as someone like Chad Flexington. Simple fact is, these people are often tossed to the side after the stick is shown off. Let's bring up some really good examples here. First up, we have Munzea Andre. Now, I'm not really going to comment on how good this athlete is, but they were brought up for the story of being born weighing only 1 pound in the qualifiers. But then, despite competing in 2 more seasons, in addition to making it to the semifinals of ANW 15, they have never been shown ever, as they haven't been shown since. Then there's Gavin Obi, who would honestly call one of the biggest rookies of ANW 16, despite only being shown once. He had a tragic story in that episode, and then made the top two, but was not shown in the qualifiers before that, and on stage 1 right after. Then there's Ethan Goldowski, who has been shown off twice for his story of having depression and his message of it being okay to not be okay. It's a good message, but they really overblow it in his segments, and throughout his time on ANW, 2 of his segments on ANW 14 and 16 are literally, basically word for word, the same segment. At least ANW 17 varied it up with it talking about his coach, Philip Scott, but even then, Goldowski and Philip were both tossed to the side after telling their story, with both of them being fast-forwarded in the semifinals, despite Goldowski barely missing the cut at the finals since he fell in the salmon ladder. And I would call this one of the more shocking fails of the season in general. Then, don't even get me started on competitors like Elijah Browning and Isaiah Thomas. 2 amazing athletes who I think have plenty of potential in the sport, who are completely brought down by the stories of both of them being effectively mama's boys. I'll say this. It's okay to have something like that as a part of your personality. In fact, Adam Whale was really overblown for this very reason. However, it's not their entire stick. Despite Isaiah Thomas being an amazing athlete, and definitely a contender to win an all for ANW 18, I would personally argue that his stick of being a mama's boy seems to be more important in the editing than how good he actually is. Same with Elijah Browning. His mom has breast cancer, and the fight she has with it has to be brought up almost every time Elijah gets a segment. Finally, I'd like to bring up Max Feinberg. Feinberg was promoted as a really top rookie for ANW 13, and obviously he was the trombone ninja. This is what his segment was about in the ANW 13 semifinals. However, he was completely ignored for the rest of the season, despite getting all the way to stage 2, and his only real big story after this is his mom who has breast cancer. But otherwise, Max Feinberg hasn't really been shown since. And despite going all the way to stage 3 in ANW 14, Yao has been completely ignored in the edit, which really isn't fair to him in my opinion. The only really time I'd say this was respectively done recently was the story of Travis Russ during ANW 15. Travis Russ was the ninja coach of both Ethan Barnicki and Vance Walker, both of whom made it to stage 3 in ANW 15. Travis Russ has passed away in a motorcycle accident in 2021. He had competed previously on ANW 11 and came up just short at Las Vegas, with his qualifying one even being cut. I say this segment was really respectful, and I think these 2 runs at stage 3 stick out for this very reason. This is a good story done right. Now, to drive this home, let's make a comparison between the old and new eras with a very similar story. Both Lucas Riali and Christopher Harding-Jones both have a similar story of losing their father during their lives, although both of them are in 2 different situations, as Lucas Riali's father ended up committing suicide, while Christopher Harding-Jones' father passed away due to cancer. This was treated surprisingly well, as a way for Lucas to come out of his shell in his first show in 1 of the season, to become one of the 3 19-year-olds to finish stage 1. It was treated as a triumphant story, with Lucas Riali honoring his dad in the process. However, Christopher Harding-Jones' segment about roughly the same thing was overblown 3 separate times each time he was shown, and it really didn't matter, and it had an entire phrase to it, living wide. It didn't matter because it was totally overblown. To this day, Christopher Harding-Jones is one of the most hated athletes in ANW just because he got this much screen time. Starting in ANW 14, we started to receive tons of obstacles that were really overly abundant, and nothing more than that. Now, I will admit, before this, there were some exceptions that I will call overly gimmicky. Some examples being On Guard, The Coconut Climb, and Dangerous Curves, from ANW 10 and 11 respectively. But Season 14 made a huge abundance of these. There was Carnival, Roller Coaster, Shattered Panes, Despicables, Kickboards, Ghost Town, I can keep going. ANW 15 was not much better. In fact, you can argue it's much worse. We had The Gambler, The Getaway, Ring the Bells, Lasso Launch, the list goes on. Literally the only obstacle from season 15 that you could really not call a gimmick waster is Thread the Needle. And even then, it has a really dumb name. 16 also has pizza parties added to the equation. Not helping, guys. Not helping. I wouldn't be surprised if this is a philosophy carried for ANW 18, as it is confirmed to have new obstacles, unlike ANW 17. Finally, let's talk about getting Total Victory and the title of American Ninja Warrior, which has definitely changed since Season 11. In fact, in Season 11, it was even different than it was in Season 7. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself with that statement. Now, first off, since True Treasure's Total Victory, three people have followed in his footsteps, but in very different ways. These people are Daniel Gill, Vance Walker, and Caleb Bergstrom. Now, Vance is basically irrelevant to this statement. He was the grand champion and won the grand prize in both seasons 15 and 16. And as of season 17, his brief guest appearances was acknowledged as an American Ninja Warrior, though never referred to as the title, just referred to as reigning grand champion and the like. Which has kind of just become the modern terminology for the person who won the season overall. Mostly used to separate from the people who did climb stage 4 and became American Ninja Warriors, but times were too slow to claim the grand prize. And in the show's editing and basic acknowledgement, invalidating their triumphs. Now, I do want to give the show some credit, but also acknowledge something that maybe not everyone really recognizes. During the segments of Stage 4, from ANW 14 to 16, there was a very different attitude than the segments of Stage 4 before that. To put it simply, it's more about the money than anything else. No, it's about the money. While some athletes do mention about the experience of conquering Stage 4, really only Josh Levin was passionate about the idea of claiming Total Victory as a title. Everyone else, it was really about the money, and this was especially the case for ANW 15 and 16. Once Daniel Gill hit the buzzer with 2 seconds left, while yes, Matt Oakbird did congratulate him, there was also the part 2 where Matt brings up the fact that the $1 million isn't in his hands, and quite yet. While yes, this was true, they act like this is the most important thing in the world, in a way that I just feel like is a little disrespectful. When Jeff Britton claimed Total Victory, but was not guaranteed the money, it wasn't the crutch to his run. He was acknowledged for the triumph, and being the first American Ninja Warrior was an accomplishment all on its own. And Britton was never denied that title despite not winning the money. Gill and Caleb have absolutely been denied their titles. Neither of them referred to as American Ninja Warriors, not even in the moment. In fact, they haven't really been acknowledged for climbing Stage 4 outside of the moment really at all. And we'll get to Caleb in half a second, but for Daniel Gill, this is an interesting conundrum. In ANW 16, Gill was quoted saying that the ending of ANW 15 was bittersweet, and the editing is totally tailored around the idea that Gill just barely lost out, kind of acting like there was no victory in achieving Total Victory. In fact, like I said earlier, they never really crowned Daniel Gill an American Ninja Warrior. At this point in the show's run, they haven't even really mentioned the words Total Victory or the title of American Ninja Warrior since Drew's win. Throughout season 16, Gill was still a contender, but it never really came up the fact that he had technically won, and it just didn't really feel that his status in the Ninja world was really escalated by the Total Victory. This is unlike Jeff Britton. Now, you could chalk this up to Jeff being the first American Ninja Warrior, a title that was built up for the last 7 years of the show's run, that being different from Daniel Gill, who was only the 4th to do it, but it's still recognition that Gill never got. And if Daniel Gill got very little recognition, but was still at least acknowledged for his accomplishment past the season, Caleb got literally nothing at all. Nothing at all. Caleb Bookstone was congratulated in the moment and mentioned to be the 6th athlete to conquer Mount Midoriyama in under 30 seconds, but was never called an American Ninja Warrior due to the fact that he did it after Vance Walker, slower than Vance Walker and after Vance's run, and it didn't matter almost immediately, and during the preceding season, Caleb was basically ignored. He was fast-forwarded up until the weightlifting finals to where he was a secondary competitor in his group, not really getting any kind of focus in his stage 4-1, not even really being used as any kind of proper B-roll. In fact, it was only mentioned during one of his races. He says, it doesn't really matter that Caleb was knocked out pretty early in the final 32 in ANW 17, but the point is that he should have been one of the front runners of the season given the stage 4, given the fact that he claimed total victory. But climbing stage 4 did literally nothing for Caleb's career, and that is stupid in my opinion. I know it sounds like I'm making a big deal out of nothing, and maybe I am to some of you, but to me, this is a total dishonorment of the title of American Ninja Warrior, and the story that the show was trying to tell for the first 11 years of its life. Mount Midoriyama has lost all integrity because of the way the editing has built it up. The money was always secondary until ANW 12, where the money became the more important standpoint. Again, Daniel and Caleb's total victories don't matter because they didn't get the money. Like I've said in the past, 10 years ago, people were making a big deal about Jeff Britton not getting the money, despite getting a title. If ANW had as many eyes on it now as it did back then, I'm sure people would be complaining even more, because Daniel and Caleb, as I've said, have gotten less recognition than Jeff Britton ever did. Honestly, very tragic. So, with that, I think the picture is pretty clear. The 5 factors that I discussed in the previous segment are either completely ignored or completely fundamentally different in today's world. And the way they are treated kind of ruins the integrity that all these factors had in making ANW feel like a sports show back in its early years. So, how could things change? And what is it looking like for the future? Well, ANW 18 has already been filmed, and it's already set quite the precedent of being a part of this era. I've already mentioned it having a known gimmick, but it also still has a similar format to ANW 17 of lacking Mount Midoriyama, so it's similar to Season 16 in that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if it continues the same principles from ANW 17 in terms of its editing and actual format. We don't know quite yet how that's going to look, but I do think it's going to be very similar, especially at least at the time of recording. However, ANW 19 can be different. It can be different if they wanted to make it. But to explain how, I'd like to talk about Season 15 real quick. ANW 15 is probably one of the worst seasons in the show's history. Totally tearing down the format of old in order to institute a new wasting ideal, basically destroying any integrity that format still had after ANW 14's bad editing almost ruined it. But ANW 15 basically took the skull of that and removed every kind of substance from it. But here's the thing. Within hindsight, I respect its intent. The changes they did were kind of awfully executed. But I respect the intent. The intent of ANW 15's format changes, at least to me, was to bring in new viewers and change the show fundamentally while still keeping the same final results and quests the same. They went a little out of control with it, but I think at the core, that was what they were trying to do. And I respect that idea. ANW has been decreasing viewers over the years, so I understand the idea of wanting to bring new life into a show that may seem like a stalemate, as for the past 10 years it has had the same format every season with the exception of ANW 12. Yeah, there's some changes here and there, but it's always been 5 to 6 qualifiers, 4 to 6 semifinals, and then the 4 stages of Las Vegas. I can understand why some producers may see that as stale. Though I'm not a fan of it, it's okay to change a format for the sake of doing something new. ANW 10 and 11 actually did this fairly well with the integration of both the Mega Wall and Power Tower. I think these are great changes that, while yes, may have flipped the rules of the competition, ended up adding some new flair to it. I think ANW 10 stands out for this very reason. And though the safety pass is controversial, I do think it was implemented in the right way. Everyone who had a safety pass earned it. It doesn't matter how they used it, they earned it, and had amazing seasons just because of it. The only person who avoided their safety pass was Michael Torres. So I'm gonna make up my own season 19, with the idea of altering the format from ANW 14 in a similar way ANW 15 tried to do, but just executing it a lot better. So let's go into it. I understand that ANW's budget is the main reason why the format got scaled down over the preceding seasons. ANW 11 really was the peak of the sport, with ANW 12, like I said before, being a downgrade even before the pandemic. So let's establish our rules within similar boundaries to that. Similar to ANW 13 and 14, we will have 2 locations, one for qualifiers, one for semis. Doesn't matter where, just 2 places at Las Vegas, so that we can still have Mount Midoriyama in Las Vegas. Similar to ANW 17, there will be 6 qualifiers, with the top 15 men and top 3 women moving straight to the semifinals. The top 2 of the night will end up going head-to-head on a racing course, or similar in format to ANW 15 and 16, however with the idea of the power tower. The reward for winning this matchup is a speed pass. Allows you to skip the racing finals and go straight to Vegas, just like ANW 11. Also like ANW 11, you do compete in these matchups for the possibility of winning the safety pass as well. This allows the racing courses to feel like the same kind of finale as the power tower did, which is what I think the one-offs were trying to go for in hindsight. But it only really accomplished one time in ANW 16. And that was just because things happened to work out in that way, where 2 teenagers who knew how to race ended up being in the one-offs because of honestly really stupid circumstances. ANW 11 did this by making the top 2 fastest move on there, so I think if ANW 19 wants to have a modified format with integrating racing, this is how you do it, as done previously. Semifinals can still be racing. As I've said in the past, I don't think this was a bad idea in concept. But we just need better course design. Take metrics from Team Ninja and ANW Junior Season 3. Kind of combine the 2 together to make some simple courses that look fun to traverse and keep being fun to watch despite the inability to change them. Both seasons of Team Ninja only had 1 obstacle change per episode, that being the 5th obstacle. We could set a similar precedent for the semifinals this season, but just make them varied and make them fun. Every Team Ninja course is different because of that 5th obstacle. So I see no reason why something similar shouldn't be done for this new format. There will be 6 qualifiers and 4 semifinals, with the 100 moving on from the qualifiers total being divided into the 4 semifinals. The winners of each race will be able to move on to the national finals with no caveats, with the top 3 non-winners being able to move on as well. I'm changing it from the top 2 for the simple fact that there were a lot of weird cutoffs in ANW 16, and a lot of people who ended up clearing the course but weren't allowed to move on just because their time wasn't fast enough. This won't fix all those instances, but it will make it more fair in my opinion. And yeah, the top 2 of the night, as previously alluded to, will go head-to-head for a safety pass. Obviously, the people with the speed pass can't be eliminated even if they lose their races. The same rules do apply though. They are allowed to eliminate their opponent if they don't make it to the top 3 non-winners. This isn't exactly the most fair thing in the world, but it's really the only way this works, so it's a fine caveat, I think. Anyway, with the safety passes won, we'd go on to the Vegas finals, which should work the same way as they have done in every other season, with the exceptions of 15 and 16. 4-stage course, failing you out unless you have a safety pass. That's everything done. I'm not going to go into obstacle design just because we'd be here a while, but the one thing I want to note, bring back split decision for stage 1. I don't care how you have to do it, just bring back the high road. It made stage 1 so much fun, and I think it would improve a lot. For stage 2, no racing. I don't think it should be here. However, make stage 2 more speed-based. If course design for ANW 14 is fine, just lower the time limit. Make it more of a time crunch. In fact, this could be even more justified in today's terms. Speed has been so important for the racing in ANW 17 and 18 that having a strict time limit for stage 2 and even stage 1 as well could make a huge difference. And I think it's really the only change that needs to be made to the design philosophy of Stage 2 from ANW 14. Stage 3 should just be less abundant with its landing pads and rest bars. Also, the fact that there was chalk at literally every obstacle, yeah, I don't think that should really be allowed. Chalk should be allowed at both the cliffhanger and the final obstacle. Also, for the love of God, please unnerf the cliffhanger. We would just be living in a much better world if the cliffhanger was more like this and not like this. Finally, Stage 4 should get some kind of modification. As I've explained in the National Finals retrospective, I understand why AEW never changed it, but after a double total victory, and Vance Walker making a fucking mockery over the rope climb twice, yeah, no, we need a change. But I propose a very simple one. Since ANW 13, Mount Midoriyama was constructed with the idea of the cat grab competition in mind. You can actually see it behind the rope in every season from ANW 13 forward. The cat grab starts as the beginning of the course, and then you jump into the rope. It sounds like a really cool idea to me. I'm not really sure how much the time really should be. I think 30 seconds is manageable, but it might need to be a bit more. Some people can climb the I-beam really fast. In fact, I'm only surprised that the men discover some really cool technique to make it go fast. So 30 seconds might be reasonable, but it really would knock you out having to make that jump. It may not be safe, but I think you can make it work. So I would love something like that integrated. It could be a cheap way to spoofing it up. In fact, if you need to make Mount Midoriyama smaller and just adapt the difficulty with that in mind, then do that. It's okay to cut cost. The prize money does not need to be $1 million. Oh, it never needed to be that high, so it's okay to lower it. 500,000 is reasonable, but I would even say 250 is reasonable. Remember, back in AEW 2, that was the prize money for clearing Stage 4. So, reasonably speaking, that's the way I see it. I think this is the standard, especially if AEW needs a cheaper season. I think this should be the standard. And I think this would be okay. And that's how AEW 19 would look if they adapted the format and made some good changes to it. I don't think everything's perfect. In fact, if you guys want to poke some holes in my format, go ahead, I don't care. But I do think plenty of ideas in this format can help things. And I think AEW should take lessons from what it did in the past. I don't know what AEW 19 is going to look like. In fact, we don't even know if it's going to exist. But we'll probably know fairly soon. And I hope the answer is yes. December 12th, 2009. This is the date that American Ninja Warrior first aired on G4. It was mostly a qualifier for It was mostly a low-budget qualifier for Sasuke, branching off the earlier programming of American Ninja Challenge, which itself was branching off the programming of Attack of the Show, which was a variety-based game show. The first season of American Ninja Warrior was really rough, filmed inside of a parking lot on Venice Beach, and later on filmed on the actual beach itself for the finals. At the time, it was mostly just supposed to be an extension of the programming of American Ninja Challenge. The show would continue this format for the next few years up until 2011. May 20th, 2012. This was the date that American Ninja Warrior 4 aired on both G4 and NBC. This now being the first date that the Vegas version of Mount Midoriyama was introduced to the public. Over the next few months, it would begin to be built up, and later on, 100 Americans would be sent to this version of Mount Midoriyama to attempt to crown the first ever American Ninja Warrior once more. This did not end up happening through a variety of factors, not only due to the amount of athletes competing there, but also due to the inability for NBC to create a well-designed course. While yes, they had the blueprints from Sasuke 27, and they mostly utilized them to construct the course, it was very sloppily made, and there were lots of internal errors with the actual materials and course design that led to a lot of instances that simply should not have happened. Particularly, the last ninja standing at this tournament, Brent Stephenson, did not actually clear the second stage. However, the producers allowed him to move on to stage 3 due to him being the only person to even make it past the metal spin and hit the buzzer. But stage 3 would end up being a big showcase of Brent's actual skill level. The reconstruction of the ultimate cliffhanger wasn't exactly as hard as the Japanese equivalent. Because of this, Brent Stephenson, despite having a mostly sloppy run at the obstacle, was able to clear it, becoming the first American to technically ever do so. He later ended his run on the hang climb, and the season ended without a new American Ninja Warrior being crowned. September 14th, 2015. Two Americans, Jeff Witten and Isaac Cordero, made history as the first two athletes ever to complete the third stage of Mount Midoriyama. Both of these athletes were the first two to ever attempt stage 4. Jeff climbed first and just barely reached the top, claiming total victory by 0.35 seconds. Jeff Witten was crowned the first American Ninja Warrior, but was outed out of the prize money by the man who went after him, Isaac Cordero, who not only beat his time by a number of seconds, but also became the first grand champion of American Ninja Warrior, claiming the $1 million cash prize. May 30th, 2018. On this date, the 10th season of American Ninja Warrior would premiere on NBC. This season introduced two major gimmicks that would change the trajectory of American Ninja Warrior. First off was the Mega Wall, basically challenging athletes to climb a massive 18-foot warped wall. Anyone who made it up would be given $10,000 as a reward. This was given to 6 individual athletes from the qualifiers of that season. The second major change to the season was the lowering of the competitive age limit from age 21 to 19, which allowed many athletes, most notably Matissa Wadi, to come onto the show and dominate the courses, making it all the way to stage 2 in Vegas. September 16th, 2019. While already talked about, this date is synonymous with being the capping off of the original era of American Ninja Warrior, and being the date that the second American Ninja Warrior Grand Champion and the third American Ninja Warrior overall, Drew Drescher, was crowned the next winner of American Ninja Warrior, being the second athlete to claim the $1 million cash prize. March 12th, 2020. Up to this point, the 12th season of American Ninja Warrior was set in stone. All the athletes had been chosen and given callbacks, and the 3 qualifiers were set up inside 3 indoor locations to set off a modified version of the Vegas format from previous. However, just 48 hours before the first qualifier was meant to take place, aka presumably March 12, 2020, it was announced that the first qualifier, held in LA, would be postponed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This later came for the rest of the season, and the entirety of season 12 was completely altered in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. August 31st, 2020. That modified season for season 12 finally premiered on NBC. This premiered on a date that many ANW seasons would mostly be done with their airings. However, this season, due to the delays, would end up airing during the fall of 2020 instead of the summer into early fall. This season was very different from previous seasons, being in a modified format that did not include Mount Midoriyama at all, that ended with the guaranteed winner who would win $100,000 upon becoming the champion of the season. May 31st, 2021. This marked the premiere date of season 13, aka the date the age limit was finally lowered from age 19 to age 15. This was done to bring in a much younger audience to the show, as well as to allow people from American Ninja Warrior Jr. to compete as special invites, with the indication that the majority of them were already ready for the competition, which was mostly an understatement, as the top 2 of the season, Vance Walker and Caden Lebsack, were both teenagers, Caden being 15 and Vance being 16. Both of these athletes would become big in the sport later on, with both of them reaching the final stage in their tenures, and Vance Walker later on becoming the next grand champion of American Ninja Warrior just a couple years later. June 5th, 2023. On this date, the original format that made American Ninja Warrior what it was given one last hurrah, but completely torn down limb from limb. introducing racing into the semifinals, replacing the previous 10 obstacle courses that had become synonymous with that part of the format. The Vegas part of this competition was heavily altered too, with it eliminating the major stick of the Vegas finals, giving every athlete only one shot at the course, and if they fell in the water, their season was done. Now, while yes it was mostly still the case, the top 24 were guaranteed to move on. So if less than 24 clears happened on the first stage, which did end up happening with only 18 clears, Stage 2 was now a race instead of an individual format, guaranteeing that at least half the athletes, aka 12 plus 2 extras from the one-offs, were guaranteed to move on to the third stage. The third stage would have 14 ones on it, this ending with more than half of the athletes clearing, with a total of 8 clears and 8 people attempting Stage 4. On this fourth stage, 2 more American Ninja Warriors were crowned, Daniel Gill and Vance Walker. Although one more season would end up airing in 2024, it was filmed within the same production year, and not much really came of it aside from much better results and an additional American Ninja Warrior in the form of Caleb Bergstrom, who got just as much publicity as Daniel Gill did, except less because he was less well known at the time. Climbing Stage 4 did nothing for his career, which, as I've previously said, is quite the tragedy. Regardless, seasons 15 and 16 led to the conning of Vance Walker, and led to a total defining of the teenagers in American Ninja Warrior. June 2nd, 2025. From here, what the show originally was, is when NBC took it over in 2012, was completely and utterly different. While the qualifiers and semis will mostly remain the same from ANW 14, the finals were no longer on Mount Midoriyama, but instead racing finals where it was side-by-side racing all the way through the end, with very rough course design and an overall very messy format, which led to a very messy season overall. The champion of this season was Kai Beckstrand, and who had a mostly inhuman performance throughout the season with basically no mistakes and almost no struggle throughout the entire season. Season 17 was different not only for this reason, but because it had a completely goal in mind. ANW was no longer a sports show, it was entertainment, and Season 17 did nothing more than solidify it. And now we're about to add a new date to this list, June 8th, 2026, the date that Season 18 premieres, and this new era of racing ANW being basically solidified. This season has a probability of being the final season of the show. Though not confirmed at the time of recording, it is pretty probable. Like I said before, I personally hope this doesn't happen. I do hope ANW 19 happens. But not because I want to see the show continue, but because I want to see the people who grew up with the show actually get their shot on it. I personally think for a lot of athletes, particularly the ones who had been competing on ANW Junior, that it would be kind of unfair if the show goes away before they get the shot at their childhood dreams. It would be kind of like the world taking away the thing that gave them purpose in life. While this is especially important for me personally, as I would like to get on the show myself, a lot of other kids and a lot of other people in general may want to get on the show. Plenty of people are still trying. Many have been trying for years, but AEW would not give them the call. This is mostly because of the exploitive nature of the producers and the kind of stories they choose to tell. Your skill in Ninja Warrior is completely secondary. That's how it is right now, and that's the new landscape. When AEW was a sports show, it wasn't like this. But now that it isn't, it totally is. It's likely not to change unless NBC sees a reason to sell the property. And if that were to happen, I'm honestly not sure what would really come of it. Ninja Warrior, as of now, is one of NBC's most regular programming. It's not exactly the most popular program on the network, but it is something seasonal and expected at this point. The fans of it always know when it's gonna come, either the last week of May or the first couple weeks of June. That's the general trend for the show, and while yes, Season 18 is premiering a lot later than usual, it's still the case. And it's a very curious sight to see what will end up happening for the future, if this is the last time that cycle repeats, or if we're going to keep on going. Either way, I will personally be here for it. And I hope with everything shown in this video, you guys aren't afraid to at least try to live with inside ANW, despite how bad of a show it has become. I will admit the show really is often a 6 out of 10 at best, but when it hits its high points, it's still an amazing watch. It comes down to the athletes who are still competing today, the ones from back then who are easy to cheer on, or if you grew up with the teenagers, the ones who have gotten their stories told in the best way, which definitely varies from athlete to athlete. Like I've said, we'll have to see what happens, but overall, I personally hope that American Ninja Warrior will stick around for just a little bit longer. Just long enough for it to maybe have one more swan song, and maybe, just maybe, visit Mount Midoriyama one last time. We'll see what happens, but that's all for me, and I'll see you guys next time.